Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today is July 30, 2026, and we are unpacking a really massive stack of morning news briefs.
Yeah, it's a heavy one today.
It really is. The data we have reveals a world undergoing these intense, simultaneous stress tests. And our mission today is to cut through all the noise of this very heavy news cycle and find the hidden connections for you.
Right, because there's always a through line if you look close enough.
Exactly. So my question for you, the listener, is this. How do a localized foodborne illness in Michigan, a massive tech earnings report out of Silicon Valley, and a Qatari tanker navigating the Strait of Hormuz all tell the exact same story about the hidden systems keeping our world running?
I mean, I know it sounds like an impossible riddle, but untangling it is really the only way to actually understand the mechanics of the current global economy.
Definitely. But before we jump in, just a quick but super important note on the format today. The sources we're looking at, they cover some incredibly intense geopolitical and military escalations.
Yeah, highly sensitive stuff.
Right. And I want to be perfectly clear with you, the listener. We are strictly impartial here. We are simply reporting the factual events exactly as detailed in the source material.
We are absolutely not taking any political sides.
No. Nor are we endorsing any actions from the U.S., Iran, Israel, Saudi Arabia, or, any other involved nations. We are just looking at the data to understand the systems at play.
Which is a vital disclaimer, because we are analyzing the infrastructure of these events, not editorializing the politics behind them.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the physical choke points of the globe. Because the U.S. military just conducted a major 2-hour operation targeting dozens of Iranian Revolutionary Guard facilities.
And we're talking major infrastructure here: command centers, missile sites, drone facilities, and maritime defenses.
Yeah, and this was direct retaliation for an attempted Iranian ballistic missile attack on American forces in Jordan, where Jordan actually had to intercept 5 missiles before they hit their targets.
Right, and the regional ripples from that 2-hour window are just massive. I mean, Iran is already reporting casualties on Qasem Island.
And that island is highly strategic, right?
Yeah.
Because it sits right near the Strait of Hormuz.
Exactly. It's right on the choke point. And the political fallout is everywhere. We're seeing former President Trump warn of forceful responses to future attacks.
And Israel is warning Tehran against escalation too, right?
Yeah, though notably they didn't actually participate in these specific strikes. Meanwhile, Iraq is actively condemning the joint strikes as a violation of their sovereignty.
Which brings me to my first real hurdle with this data. We have Saudi Arabia publicly joining American military operations for the first time, but they are simultaneously urging caution.
Yeah, it's a tightrope walk.
How do those two things even exist in the same reality? How do you join a strike and ask for calm in the exact same breath?
What's fascinating here is the sheer economic gravity forcing that delicate balancing act. Think about what Saudi Arabia is actually trying to protect and, the price tags attached to it.
Right.
They are actively seeking an international coalition to protect Red Sea shipping from Houthi attacks. They've even had their forces strike Houthi sites around Yemen's Hodeida port.
So they're taking direct action there.
They are. And why? Because right now, Brent crude is sitting at $91.80 a barrel. The economic stakes of these transit routes shutting down are just astronomical.
Oh, wow. You look at Shell's morning report from our briefs. They just posted $9.84 billion in quarterly profit.
It's staggering.
And to capture the upside of these elevated fuel prices, they're running their refineries at 102% of stated capacity. Which, wait, how do you even run a refinery at 102%?
Well, you push it.
Doesn't that mean they're skipping scheduled maintenance and pushing the physical plant past its safe limits just to chase these high oil prices?
That is precisely what it means. When prices hit near $90 a barrel, the financial incentive to defer maintenance and run the engines hot totally overrides standard operational caution.
That sounds incredibly risky.
It's highly lucrative in the short term, but deeply fragile in the long term. And that fragility extends to the shipping lanes themselves. For example, a Qatari liquefied natural gas tanker just crossed the Strait of Hormuz.
But there's a catch, right?
A big one. It only happened after receiving explicit Iranian approval, and Iran actually rejected Oman's proposal for joint regional management of the waterway.
So what does that mean for everyday shipping?
It means we are seeing passages being individually negotiated. It is a total ship-by-ship hustle right now. And meanwhile, the U.S. had a gas storage tanker struck at Egypt's Damietta port.
So global shipping right now is like a critical highway where the toll booth operators are heavily armed, and the tolls literally change by the hour based on who your friends are.
That analogy hits the nail on the head. And if we connect this geopolitical tension to the everyday labor market, we see how these macro events shape daily life.
Because it's creating jobs, strangely enough.
Exactly. Renewed fighting and the scramble for secure shipping translates directly into surging career demand. Corporations are having to build their own geopolitical navigation teams.
Wow.
We're seeing a massive spike in hiring for maritime surveillance experts, logistics personnel, air defense maintenance crews. The conflict is literally reshaping the global job market.
And, the incredible volatility and cost of moving physical goods right now might be exactly why Silicon Valley is trying to build a completely new parallel economy in the digital space.
That's a great point.
Because while physical shipping lanes are under literal fire, corporations are pouring unprecedented capital into artificial intelligence infrastructure.
The scale of the pivot is staggering, especially when you look at the broader economic climate they're operating in.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The macroeconomic backdrop right now is incredibly tense. The Federal Reserve just held interest rates at 3.50 to 3.75%.
But it wasn't unanimous.
No, 3 officials dissented. They wanted a rate increase because they are absolutely terrified of persistent inflation. And Wall Street hates uncertainty, so they punished the market for it. The Dow dropped 2.2%.
Right, a fearful environment.
Yeah, and in that fearful environment, you have Microsoft and Meta telling 2 completely different stories about spending billions of dollars.
Let's look at the contrast, starting with Microsoft, because they reported $90 billion in quarterly revenue. Their Azure cloud computing revenue is up 43%. And they've passed a $100 billion annualized run rate for the first time.
Just to pause there, when you say annualized run rate, what does that actually signal to the market?
Good question. It means if you take their current monthly revenue and assume they maintain this exact pace for the next 12 months, $100 billion is their floor.
Oh, I see.
It's a massive psychological milestone for investors because it proves the scale is real and sustainable, not just a one-off spike.
And they had good news on the user front, too?
Yeah, they reported their AI assistant, Copilot, surpassed 30 million paid users.
30 million paying for it.
Exactly. And because they had that proof of adoption, when they announced they spent roughly $41 billion this quarter alone on capital projects, Wall Street cheered. Their stock actually went up 8%.
But then you have Meta. They slightly beat revenue expectations, hitting $60.8 billion, but they missed on earnings per share.
Which Wall Street doesn't like.
Right. And then, without the same kind of paid user receipts that Microsoft showed, Meta raised their capital spending forecast to a staggering $145 billion.
And the market reaction was swift. Meta's shares dropped 8%.
It's like 2 neighbors building massive mega mansions on credit. Microsoft is already renting out the rooms to paying tenants with Copilot, while Meta is still pouring the concrete and asking the bank for another $145 billion.
That is exactly how investors see it.
But I have to push back here. Is this level of spending even sustainable? Like, at what point does Wall Street stop caring about Copilot user growth and start demanding actual massive profit margins from all this AI infrastructure?
That is the trillion-dollar question hanging over Silicon Valley right now. Investors will gladly stomach historically massive infrastructure spending, but only if customer adoption and revenue growth are equally visible.
You need to see the return.
Right. They want to see that enterprise AI is moving out of the experimental R&D phase and into recurring, dependable software spending. And we shouldn't think of this digital spending as existing only in some abstract cloud either.
Right, because the cloud is heavily grounded on Earth.
Heavily. Microsoft's $41 billion quarter and Meta's $145 billion forecast that money buys land, it pours concrete, and lays transatlantic cable.
It's physical stuff.
It buys entire power grids. These AI budgets are funding massive construction projects. It takes an absolute army of electrical engineers, plumbing experts, and cooling specialists to keep these data centers from melting down.
So just like the geopolitical conflicts in the Middle East are creating maritime security jobs, the AI boom is driving demand for a whole new class of heavy physical infrastructure jobs.
Exactly.
So we are building these hyper-advanced digital brains, and we are fighting over global physical choke points. But as we look deeper into the sources from this morning, the ultimate infrastructure, Our fundamental biological and environmental systems are flashing some really serious warning signs.
Yeah, the environmental data is particularly sobering because it shows how interconnected these feedback loops actually are.
We've got shifting wildfire dangers in Europe. The threat is moving toward Italy, Greece, and Central Europe. France is bracing for heat waves while fighting fires around Bordeaux, and Spain is under a national emergency.
The scale of it is intense.
The detail in the sources that stop me in my tracks is that it's getting so hot, large fires are generating their own weather. They're creating pyrocumulonimbus clouds.
Yeah, it's a terrifying phenomenon.
Can you explain what that actually means on the ground? Like, how does a fire make a cloud?
So imagine a fire burning so hot and so large that the intense heat forces massive amounts of air upward, acting almost like a chimney. As that air rises and cools into the upper atmosphere, the moisture condenses into a thunderstorm cloud, a pyrocumulonimbus cloud.
But these aren't rain clouds that put out the fire, right?
No, unfortunately not. They produce severe downdraft winds that fan the flames in erratic directions, and they generate lightning strikes that start entirely new fires miles away.
Oh, wow.
It is a terrifying, self-sustaining feedback loop where the disaster literally breeds more of itself.
That is wild. And speaking of weather systems, we have to talk about the broader patterns. Because El Niño arrived in June, and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, expects a below-normal Atlantic hurricane season.
Right, their forecast is out.
They're forecasting 8 to 14 named storms, with 1 to 3 becoming major hurricanes. We also have Hurricane Genevieve currently churning in the Pacific. But wait a second, a below-normal hurricane season sounds like a rare win for the planet right now. Why shouldn't we celebrate fewer storms?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the total number of storms doesn't actually dictate the total amount of devastation.
How so?
Well, lower storm counts do not mean lower climate losses. A quieter season doesn't eliminate the risk from weaker or slow-moving tropical systems. When a storm lacks the atmospheric steering currents to push it along, it basically stalls over an area.
It just sits there.
Exactly. It acts like a fire hose stuck in one position, dumping catastrophic amounts of rain and causing devastating floods, even if it never reaches Category 4 or 5 wind speeds.
So it's not just about the wind.
Right. The severity of the impact isn't just about wind speed, it's about the sheer weight of the water and the duration of the stress on local infrastructure.
The infrastructure just gets completely overwhelmed. And, if you're listening to this and feeling a bit of vertigo, you aren't alone. It's overwhelming to realize that everything from global shipping to regional weather patterns is operating on such fragile margins.
It really is.
And that exact same principle, prolonged, invisible stress on a system, is what we are seeing in the public health data today.
The public health metrics are a textbook example of hidden vulnerabilities.
Let's talk about Michigan, because they are managing a massive outbreak of cyclosporiasis. The state is dealing with over 8,100 cases, with 98 people hospitalized.
It's a really severe infection linked to contaminated food or water.
But federal investigators are completely struggling to track down the source, and they've had to expand their inquiry to 4 other states. Why is this so hard to trace compared to something like, say, an E. coli outbreak?
The mechanism of the parasite is what breaks the tracing system here. Cyclosporiasis has heavily delayed symptoms.
Like how delayed?
Well, E. coli will make you sick in a day or 2. But with cyclosporiasis, it can take up to 2 weeks for symptoms to appear.
2 weeks.
Yeah. And by the time someone is severely dehydrated and seeking medical help, they cannot accurately remember what specific brand of prepackaged salad or fresh berries they ate 14 days ago.
I couldn't tell you what I ate 3 days ago.
Exactly. The biological delay masks the entry point, making the supply chain nearly impossible to map before the contaminated product has already been consumed by thousands more people.
And the hits to public health just keep coming. The U.S. just hit a 35-year high for measles, with 2,318 cases.
And the demographics on that are concerning?
Yeah, almost 70% of those are in people under the age of 20. And the reason? National MMR vaccination coverage has fallen to 92.5%. 16 states have dropped below the critical 90% threshold.
This is exactly how complex biological systems fail. Let's look at the mechanism of herd immunity. Measles is one of the most contagious viruses on Earth.
Right.
When vaccination rates are at 95%, the virus hits a wall. It just cannot find enough susceptible hosts to sustain an outbreak. But when that rate slips to 92.5% or below 90%, like we are seeing in those 16 states, the math changes exponentially, not linearly.
Meaning a 2% drop in vaccinations doesn't just mean a 2% increase in risk.
Precisely. It creates massive interconnected pockets of vulnerability. The virus can now easily jump from person to person, finding the unvaccinated or the immunocompromised.
So it spreads way faster.
Yeah, the infrastructure of public health looks entirely fine on the surface until a spark hits one of those pockets. And then it erupts into a national crisis that feels like it came out of nowhere, but was actually years in the making.
It's the exact same dynamic as the slow-moving hurricane or the deferred maintenance at the oil refinery. The damage doesn't come from a sudden, violent snap. It comes from a system being steadily overwhelmed until it breaks.
It's a common thread today.
So with all these macro systems, global supply chains, digital workplaces, our climate, and our public health under such intense cascading pressure, how are everyday people actually adapting on the ground?
That's where looking at corporate retail earnings gives us a really clear window into consumer psychology.
Let's look at Starbucks. They just raised their annual sales and profit forecasts. Global same-store sales are up 7.9%. Operating margins jumped from 10.1% to 14.4% under their CEO, Brian Niccol.
Which is a huge jump.
First, for our listeners who don't spend their mornings reading financial statements, what does an operating margin actually tell us?
Operating margin is basically the percentage of revenue a company keeps as profit after paying for the day-to-day costs of running the business, like ingredients, wages, and rent.
Okay, makes sense.
A jump from 10% to 14.4% for a company the size of Starbucks is massive. It means they didn't just sell more coffee, they became significantly more efficient at selling it.
And their big secret innovation to achieve that efficiency. It wasn't some crazy new technology or AI integration. It was simpler menus and shorter wait times. Even with broader financial pressures, younger consumers are still prioritizing their daily coffee.
They simplified the operation to restore reliability.
And elsewhere in the consumer markets, you see this pushback against digital complexity. France is dealing with major privacy and age verification controversies over a new social media ban for children under 15.
Right, trying to legislate the digital space.
Meanwhile, the ultra-low-price, rapid-fire consumption model of the fashion brand Shein is being heavily threatened by new tariffs. So what does this all mean?
It's a lot to process.
It really feels like in a world of complex, cascading crises, from missile strikes to AI infrastructure booms to invisible supply chain pathogens, people are desperately clinging to simple, reliable physical comforts. You can't control the Strait of Hormuz, but you can control getting a dependably fast cup of coffee.
There is an incredible irony there. As commerce, communication, and infrastructure become increasingly abstract and digital complex, familiar physical experiences become our psychological anchors.
We need things we can touch.
Yeah, but it's crucial to understand how a company like Starbucks actually achieved that simplicity at the counter. They didn't just snap their fingers for shorter wait times. The sources show they paid for those store-level investments through corporate office consolidation and earlier layoffs.
So they sacrificed the corporate bloat to save the frontline experience.
Surviving this era requires exactly that. Whether you are a global shipping conglomerate negotiating passage in the Middle East or a local coffee chain trying to get a latte out in under 3 minutes, you have to be able to translate high-level strategic investment into reliable daily operations.
Day-to-day has to work.
Exactly. The macro environment is inherently chaotic right now, so the micro environment has to be dependable.
Which brings us full circle. We started today looking for the hidden connections in a chaotic news cycle. We've seen how the physical choke points of the Middle East dictate the cost of the fuel that powers the world, and how that forces energy giants to run their plants dangerously hot.
Pushing the limits.
We've seen how the massive infrastructure bets in Silicon Valley aren't just in the cloud. They are driving physical construction booms that require massive energy grids.
Real-world impact.
We've seen how invisible vulnerabilities in our climate and public health systems, from stalled storms to delayed parasite symptoms, can suddenly erupt into crises because the systems were slowly worn down.
Right.
And we've seen how, in response to all of this, everyday people are seeking out the reliable and the tangible. To navigate this world, you have to see how the physical, the digital, and the biological infrastructures entirely overlap.
They're one continuous breathing system. You pull a geopolitical thread in the Strait of Hormuz, and it changes the economic math on a concrete data center build in Texas.
But before we wrap up today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering thought. We've spent a lot of time talking about how to manage these massive overlapping systems. In our sources, there was a fascinating tension regarding how we monitor the future. I'll hand it over to you to lay out the paradox we are facing.
The sources noted that securing these new, massive enterprise AI systems requires intense credentials, deterministic permissions, and continuous unblinking monitoring to keep the infrastructure safe. You need absolute visibility into who is doing what at all times.
Right, total surveillance, basically.
But at the exact same time, France is struggling to enforce a social media ban for kids under 15 because the platforms cannot figure out how to verify someone's identity without violating their personal privacy.
It's a total contradiction.
So here is the question for you to mull over. If the enterprise digital infrastructure of tomorrow absolutely requires constant monitoring and strict identity verification to be secure, how will we reconcile that with our growing inability to verify who is using basic social media without destroying personal privacy? Are we building a future where safety and anonymity can no longer coexist?
That is a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking for the hidden connections, and we will see you next time.